This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Hello and welcome to Heritage Matters, a programme brought to you by the Southern Heritage Trust. I'm Dougal Stevenson. This week, Bill Southworth brings us an unusual ANZAC story about the loss of Crete and the role in it of a Southland man. And then Gregor Campbell takes us into the demi-monde of the 19th century Dunedin underclass. The battle for Crete in World War II was a disaster. Almost 700 Kiwi soldiers were killed and over 2,000 became German prisoners. It should have been a victory. Some of the failure is regarded as being the result of poor decision-making by a famous soldier-farmer from Gore. This report from Bill Southworth.
James Hargis was a brave and distinguished soldier. Born in Gore in 1891, he was a farmer when he volunteered in the First World War. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Otago Mounted Rifles, he served in Gallipoli and was seriously wounded. Following his recovery from wounds, he returned to active duty on the Western Front, winning the Military Cross, the Distinguished Service Order and the Legion of Honour. He was also promoted at the age of 27 to be Lieutenant Colonel and was given command of an Otago battalion. By the end of the war, Hargis had established himself as one of the country's most distinguished soldiers. The historian of Otago Regiment in the First World War, normally sparing in his praise, recorded,
"In the course of his long connection with the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Hargis, by his thoroughness, his soldierly ability and bearing, his great sense of military honour, and his extraordinary energy and unexampled dash in action, commanded the highest admiration and confidence of all ranks."
After the war, he resumed farming in Southland. In 1931, he entered Parliament as a member for Invercargill. Initially an independent, he was one of the strongest supporters of the new National Party, which was formed in 1936, holding an executive role in the party. From 1938, he represented the Awarua electorate and had been considered for the party's leadership. When World War II broke out, he applied to enlist. The New Zealand commander, Major General Freyberg, was concerned that Hargis was too old. He was 48. But that was not all. A medical assessment said he was not suitable for war service, as he was still prone to bouts of shell shock from the First World War. Today, shell shock is recognised as a deep mental trauma and is called PTSD. Hargis didn't give up. He approached the acting Prime Minister, Peter Fraser, with a request for a brigade command. Fraser disregarded the official advice and arranged for Hargis to be appointed commander of the 5th Infantry. The Chief of General Staff wrote to Freyberg, dissociating himself from the decision. In 1941, the Germans drove the New Zealand division out of Greece, and it retreated to the Greek island of Crete, along with other forces from Britain, Greece and Australia. It was hoped to use the island as a base from which to bomb the German oil fields in Romania. The 4 battalions of Kiwis arrived on the island on April the 25th, ANZAC Day. In his book, Crete, The Battle for Resistance, author Anthony Beauvoir writes,
"The memory of British planning at Gallipoli could not have been encouraging for Dominion troops. A British officer on a launch came out to their ships yelling instructions that all weapons apart from rifles and sidearms were to be piled on the jetty. Brigadier James Hargis, the commander of the 5th New Zealand Brigade, knew very well that they would never again see all this equipment, which they had brought with such difficulty out of Greece, and he refused point blank. In spite of Hargis' refusal, a detachment of British military police on the jetty still managed to relieve many companies of their heavy weapons."
All the troops were placed under the command of General Freyberg, who gave the 22nd Auckland Battalion the job of defending the key airport of Mar-Lamy. Although it was known paratroopers would be involved in the coming invasion, it was a new form of warfare which was little understood. Freyberg stationed many of his troops along the coastline, anticipating a major attack would come by sea. German paratroopers were shock troops. They were young and very fit. Many were only 17 or 18 and had been members of the Hitler Youth, their heads filled with nonsense about Aryan superiority. According to Alan Carr and his book, The Fall of Crete,
Hitler was obsessed by the idea of parachute troops. The very idea of these iron, ruthless men in their skull-tight helmets and strange, futuristic apparel, floating down from the blue, loaded with death in clouds of evil, many-coloured blossoms. All this mated with the synthesis of Valkyrian mysticism.
On the morning of May 20, after heavy bombardment from the German Air Force, troop-carrying gliders landed on a nearby dry riverbed. Eventually, about 40 such gliders would land, each carrying about 15 troops. Those spilling out of the gliders were mown down with machine gun fire. The Aucklanders, defending the nearby Malemi airport, looked up to see an amazing sight. Hundreds of paratroopers were spilling out of planes and floating downwards. But the Germans had made a mistake. They thought the airport would be lightly defended. The concealed Kiwis emerged from their hiding places and opened up with a withering fire from rifles and machine guns. The officers had told their troops to aim at the feet of the rapidly descending Germans. It was a slaughter. Anthony Beauvoir again.
Those Germans who survived the ascent through crossfire arrived doubly disorientated by the unexpected resistance. Some crashed onto roofs, others through the branches of olive trees. There they were shot before they had time to wriggle out of their harnesses. Suspended bodies twisted gently, as if from the macabre gibbets of a previous century.
Further down the coast, more paratroopers were dropped on the well-camouflaged 18th and 19th New Zealand battalions. The 19th alone estimated they killed 155 parachutists. The Kiwis described it as being like duck shooting or potting rabbits. On the first day of the invasion, the Germans lost over 1,800 men. Their losses were so heavy that the few German commanders still alive at Malemi Airport thought they had lost. There are many hundreds of those dead young Germans buried in a war cemetery overlooking the airport, from what was then known as Hill 107. Hill 107 was crucial to the defence of the airport because it commanded views with fields of fire across the whole area. Disastrous bungling and a mix-up in communications led to its loss the following day. This, in turn, led to the fall of the airport. The failure triggered the loss of Crete itself, because once the Germans had the airport, they were able to land troops and materiel that they needed to defeat the Allies. It was like granting them a bridge into Crete. The commander of the 22nd Battalion and the occupier of Hill 107 was Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Andrew, a regular soldier who'd won the Victorian Cross in the First World War. He was bedevilled by the loss of radio, or in fact any contact, with two of his forward companies, consisting of hundreds of his men. He had to assume that they had been overrun. The 23rd Battalion had been placed on reserve to back up Andrew's battalion, and he used an agreed signal flare to tell them he now needed help. They didn't see the flare, and they didn't come to his aid. Finally, he got through to Hargus's headquarters. Beauvoir again.
Hargust's reply to his urgent request for support claimed that the 23rd Battalion was engaged with enemy paratroops, an assertion that was unverified and untrue. Hargust's state of mind is hard to fathom. Either he was hopelessly confused and misinformed, or, reflecting Freiburg's priorities, he still regarded attacks on Maleme as secondary in importance to the threat from the sea.
That evening, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew contacted Hargus by radio and told him that without the support of the 23rd Battalion, he would have to withdraw. Hargus replied, "If you must, you must." After a bungled attempt that night to send up two companies to help him, Andrew informed Hargus that he was retreating. Hargus did not reply, even though this could have signalled that the Malemi had been lost. He even informed Freiburg's headquarters that the situation was, quote, quite satisfactory. The cruelest twist of Andrew's decision to retreat did not become apparent until after the war, when it transpired that a single platoon left in place at the airfield would have swung the course of the whole battle. A later attempt to take the airfield back with a much larger New Zealand force also failed, because in the intervening time the Germans had landed many more fresh troops to protect the airfield. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and it's easy to criticise the hesitancy and indecisiveness brought on by physical exhaustion and a breakdown of communications. That is what seems to have happened to James Hargest during the battle for Crete. It's called the fog of war. Whether his PTSD confused his judgment is an open question, but its symptoms do include fatigue and the inability to think straight. Perhaps the only consolation for the Allies was that the Germans had lost about 7,000 men killed or wounded during the battle. It's estimated that the Kiwi troops killed or wounded about 4,000 of them. It was the first time Germany had suffered such losses in the war, and Hitler refused to ever use paratroops again. Hargest and most of the New Zealand troops were evacuated to North Africa by the Royal Navy. He was captured when his headquarters were overrun by German tanks at Sidi Aziz in Libya in November 1941. He was taken before Field Marshal Rommel, who told him that his men had fought well. From a castle near Florence in Italy, in which senior officers were imprisoned, he and Brigadier Miles made a dramatic escape, which has been described in Hargest's book, Farewell Campo 12. Back in London, Hargest received the CBE and 2 bars to his DSO. He had earlier received the Greek Military Cross. In 1944, he joined the 50th Division as a New Zealand observer at the invasion of Europe on D-Day. On the 12th of August, he was killed by a shell burst in Normandy. Today, he is remembered by a street name in St Kilda and by Invercargill's James Hargest College. This is Bill Southworth reporting.
The DCC car park behind the town hall and on the corner of Philil Street used to hold a small group of houses known as Ashes Lane. Gregor Campbell has found that in the early 20th century it had a particularly unsavoury reputation.
Ashes Lane was one of the many alleyways or rights-of-way of old Dunedin, only a few of which survive. It came to prominence in the 1890s when it was known that some of the tenants of the lane were not in regular employment, but yet had money. It also became known that the Anglican Bishop of Dunedin, Bishop Neville, owned the mortgage on the place. Neville was able to employ, decades before the Nixon administration, the effective tactic of plausible deniability. He held the mortgage, it was true, but had no knowledge of the people living there and their activities. Here are a few of their activities, beginning with reportage from the Evening Star of April 1910. The opium habit. Samuel Northey was charged with having opium in his possession in a form suitable for smoking. Mr. Hanlon appeared for accused who pleaded guilty. Chief Detective Herbert said that on the morning of the 20th inst, Detectives Mitchell and Thompson visited a house occupied by accused in Ashes Lane off Philil Street. They informed him that they had information that he was producing tincture of opium and disposing of it to the Chinese. He replied, "I boiled some down a while back, but have not done so lately." Then, in his presence, they searched the premises and found in some old clothes upstairs a slush lamp and an opium tray showing traces of opium. In an old hat, they found 2 pipe heads, and in a sack, they came across the pipe stem. In the kitchen, they found a tin containing a quantity of opium ash and 2 bottles containing a small quantity of tincture. Accused himself handed them 2 horns in a jar containing about half an ounce of opium. He said that he bought the bottle of tincture on the Thursday night and boiled it down. It appeared that there was no restriction on druggists selling tincture of opium. Previously to going to Ashes Lane, accused had been living with a Chinaman in Walker Street who was a well-known opium smoker. The detectives also found an old pair of scales similar to those used in weighing out opium. Accused suffered from the opium habit to some extent himself. Mr. Hanlon said that accused had acquired the opium habit for some 16 years past, and if he got opium, he smoked it. It was absurd to suggest that he manufactured opium. His worship inflicted a fine of £25 and costs. The New Zealand Truth in those days, before it made a right turn politically in the 1950s, is a reliable source of colourful copy. This from 1910. The Loving Langleys, domestic differences at Dunedin, a wife-beater and drunkard, a smiling black and blue visage, was all right when sober. Langley throws doubt on his missus. You're not going to get out of it this time, my boy. Langley says it's a trumped-up charge. Magistrate orders imprisonment. The matrimonial troubles of George John Langley and his loving wife May, together with all the family skeletons, were brought out for the edification of Mr. Widowson SM at the Dunedin SM's court on Thursday of last week. Defendant was to have appeared on Wednesday to answer a charge of assaulting his wife, but did not appear, and it was explained that he could not appear as he was drunk in bed at home. The SM then issued a warrant for the squiffy wife assaulter, and as he was found to be in a state of swank when he was arrested, he was charged with fracture of his prohibition order. Defendant was duly brought along on Thursday morning and looked decidedly shaky. He is an elderly, thick-set individual with a beery face, and his port deadlight has gone to glory in some forgotten unpleasantness. The charge of fracture of his order was dealt with first, and it was explained that the defendant had 3 convictions for swanky and that his order had been twice grievously bent. The SM fixed a steady eye on Langley, who was hanging onto the dock rail with one hand and fingering the testament with the other, and said, "What does he do?" The question was too big for Sub-Inspector Cruikshank, so he passed it on to Constable Edwards, who is acting court orderly for what time Hughie Butler is viewing the Cathedral City of Christchurch. Constable Edwards: He's a wharf labourer, but he does not work constantly. He is married and is always more or less under the influence of drink. The SM, horrified: How does his wife get on? She goes out washing. The SM to defendant: What have you to say? I just met a few friends and it was holiday time and I overstepped the mark. But you're always overstepping the mark. I had a brother down from Duntroon and we was together. Clerk of Court Ward intimated that there was another charge. The SM: Well, I'll defer sentence on this charge until I hear the other. Langley was then charged with having assaulted his wife, May Langley. The lady, who was closely veiled, climbed into the box and, lifting her veil, disclosed a smiling black and blue visage to the SM. Her left eye was beautifully blackened and her right cheek looked as if it had been severely smitten with a cricket bat. Mrs. Langley said that defendant was her husband and stayed in Ashes Lane. On the previous Thursday, she was at a friend of hers, Mrs. Thompson's house, in the same aristocratic lane when Langley called for her. He was suffering from beer and vertigo, and she declined to accompany him, as when he was suffering from that complaint, he generally knocked her about. When she refused to go with him, she ran out the back door onto Maury Place to see the police, but he followed her and knocked her down and hit her in the mouth and took away her handbag. Then he left for home, and she followed to get her purse, as he would spend the money on beer. On her arrival home, she found that he had broken the bag and had collared the cash and fled, so she went for the police. But Constable Cox told her she would find her husband in bed, snoring the snores of the alcoholic. She returned home once more and found Langley on the sofa, and after a few words he got up and hit her on the face and body and threw her against the copper, saying, "I've killed one woman and I'll do for you, you..." Mrs. Langley exhibited her draft pattern visage to the SM. The SM: "You have no children, have you?" "No." "What's his general character to you?" "Oh, he's all right when he's sober, but when he's drunk, he's terrible." "Does he strike you?" Yes, he's hit me in bed when I was asleep and he's pulled me out of bed by the hair. The SM asked Langley if he would like to ask May any questions. Yes, didn't I give you an order to draw my money? Yes, and what was it? Didn't I have a shilling? Yes. And in the first place, your name is not May Langley. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's May Johnston, your worship. She's not married to me. It was May Johnston, but it is not now. I'm sorry I ever met you. Have you got your marriage lines? I haven't got them with me. You haven't got any. Yes, I have. The senior magistrate. Are you married to him? Yes, sir. She is not, sir. Didn't you fall over a chair in the house when you was going out? No. You're not going to get out of it this time, my boy. The magistrate. That'll do. Complainant's friend, one Margaret Thomas, a tall party with a heated visage and a yellow dress, said that Mrs. Langley was at her family residence in Ashes Lane on that awful day. Langley blew down to the door and wanted complainant to go home, but the lady refused. She then cleared out at the back door and he went after her. Witness didn't see the festivities in Maury Place. About 15 minutes after, she heard screams of murder from the Langley mansion, so she went along and told defendant the police were coming and that he should leave May alone. Langley knocked off to see if the police were coming, and when he found it was a false alarm, he continued belting her. She had seen him strike his wife in bed before. Will you say you saw me hammering her? Mrs. Langley, as she calls herself, said she was hit in Maury Place. I've seen you standing over her. Magistrate. Did he knock her down? I've seen him standing over her and striking her. You and me hasn't been on good terms. Not since you got shot in for playing out my husband. No, because she's always drinking in your house and I won't let her. You never saw me strike her in Maury Place. Magistrate. You're on the wrong track. She never said she saw you strike your wife in Maury Place. She says she saw you assault your wife in the house. Do you want to give evidence? It's only a trumped-up charge against me to get me in jail. She never liked me. Defendant was then sworn and said that when he chased his wife out onto Maury Place, he didn't hit her but only took the bag off her. He told her she wasn't going to spend his money. When she got the bag back in the house, she fell over a chair and that was how she got her beautiful marks. He had never punched his wife. In reply to the senior magistrate, Langley said he was 58 years of age. The SM. I have no doubt in my mind that you assaulted this female. You say she is not your wife, and I see that you've been continually before the court since 1906. Your trouble seems to be drink. I'm about 39 years in the colony, and I don't think my record is bad. Where were you before 1906? I came from the old country to Dunedin. Where was he before 1906? Is there no previous list? The sub-inspector. No, sir, this seems to be the only one. The SM then told Langley that he would have a chance to pull himself together and awarded him a month's imprisonment for fracture of his order and 2 months' imprisonment for assault, sentences to be cumulative. Langley then walked over to his wife, who was sitting at the back of the court, but was stopped by genial Sergeant Matthews and called back by the SM, who said, Langley, I want to tell you that if you persist in your drinking habits after this, you will probably be sent to Pakatoa for 2 years. Can I say a few words to the missus? No, I don't think so. The SM then left the bench, and a few minutes after, Langley explained to the sub-inspector that he wanted to give directions to the missus about his things. He was then permitted to say a few words across the railing, but the loving couple were parted in wrath. And I am the never wrathful Gregor Campbell for Heritage Matters.
This show will be replayed on Thursday the 21st of May at 1 p.m. and Sunday the 10th and 24th of May at 7 p.m. This programme has been generously sponsored by the Southern Heritage Trust. The Trust works to protect the city's heritage, particularly its fine old buildings and all the things that make Dunedin New Zealand's heritage capital. The Trust welcomes new members. It can be contacted at southernheritage.org.nz. That's southernheritage, all one word, .org.nz.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.